It's a strange thing about peace. Most people spend years searching for it in quieter places, kinder people, or easier days. Yet the moment life becomes unpredictable, and it always does, that peace seems to vanish like mist in the wind. And so the search begins again, as if calm were something hidden somewhere outside us. But what if the place you've been searching for your entire life was never outside at all? Think about those moments when the world feels heavy. A careless comment that lingers longer than it should. A rejection that quietly echoes in your mind. Or those nights when your thoughts refuse to settle, replaying the same worries over and over. In moments like that, it can feel as if there is nowhere to hide from the storm inside. Most people try to silence that storm by controlling the outside world. They try to fix every problem, answer every criticism, predict every disappointment. But the truth is gentle and a little surprising. The wind of life rarely listens to our plans. There is, however, a different way to live, a quieter path that many people overlook because it feels too simple. It doesn't require escaping the world or changing everyone around you. Instead, it begins with a small discovery, the realization that there is a place within you where the wind cannot reach. In today's story, you'll meet a man who believed his peace had been stolen by the storms of life. Criticism shook him, loneliness exhausted him, and the noise of the world left him searching for somewhere, anywhere, to rest. Until one day in the middle of an ordinary park, he noticed something unusual. A small lantern, a steady flame, and a quiet stranger who knew a secret most people forget. A secret about how to carry a refuge within yourself no matter how strong the winds become. And if you listen closely to this story, you may realize something surprising, that the same quiet refuge has been waiting inside you all along. There are days when the world feels just a little too loud, not only with noise but with expectations, glances, unfinished conversations. On one such day, a man named Elias walked through the city feeling as though he carried something fragile inside his chest, something like a small candle. And every hurried voice around him seemed like another gust of wind trying to blow it out. He often wondered where people went when life became too heavy. Surely there must be a place where tired hearts could sit down for a moment, a quiet corner untouched by criticism, disappointment, or the sharp sting of careless words. Elias searched for that place in cafes, long walks, and endless scrolling through distractions. Yet somehow the calm he borrowed from those moments never stayed very long. By evening, the streets glowed with soft lights, but his mind still buzzed like a restless hive. You know the feeling, perhaps, when someone's harsh comment echoes long after the conversation is over, or when a small mistake suddenly feels enormous in the silence of night. Elias felt as though he had nowhere to hide from the wind circling his candle. So he tried what many people try, music louder than his thoughts, a quick joke with strangers, even a promise to himself that tomorrow he'd finally figure everything out. But the strange thing about borrowed comfort is that it slips away the moment you stop holding it tightly. Somewhere inside, though, a quiet question kept returning. It didn't shout, it barely whispered. What if the refuge he kept searching for wasn't outside at all? What if the small candle inside him had never needed new walls? Only a place where the wind couldn't reach it. That thought followed him the next morning like a gentle shadow. Elias noticed how people hurried past, each one carrying storms no one else could see, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether anyone truly knew how to rest inside themselves. It seemed like a rare skill in a restless world, almost like a forgotten language. As he crossed a quiet park path, the wind picked up again. His shoulders tightened the way they always did when pressure returned. The candle flickered wildly in his imagination, thin and vulnerable. He sighed, half amused at himself. Funny, he murmured, how such a tiny flame can feel like everything. He didn't yet know that someone nearby understood this fragile flame very well, someone who had once watched their own candle shake in much stronger winds, and who had quietly discovered something Elias had never been taught, that the safest refuge in the world might not be a place you find, but something you learn to build within. The park was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that makes a person aware of their own breathing. Elias walked slowly along the gravel path, hands in his pockets, still thinking about that small candle inside his chest. It flickered again when a memory of yesterday's criticism crossed his mind. Strange, he thought, how words could travel so far and still feel so close, almost as if the wind had learned how to live inside his thoughts. He sat on a worn wooden bench beneath an old tree whose branches swayed lazily above him. The world continued its usual rhythm. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere, footsteps passing by. Yet none of those sounds seemed to care about the storm he felt within. And perhaps that was the tiring part of it all. The world moved on, while his candle struggled to stay lit. Elias had spent years believing peace was something you stumbled upon by accident. A perfect afternoon, a kind word, a moment when everything outside simply behaved. But life rarely followed such polite arrangements. A rude comment could appear out of nowhere. A disappointment could arrive uninvited, like rain during a picnic. So he had learned to chase comfort wherever it appeared. A distraction here, a new plan there, a promise that tomorrow things would finally settle. Yet every time he reached for calm outside himself, it slipped through his fingers, like trying to hold water with open hands, refreshing for a moment, but never lasting. He rubbed his palms together slowly, as if warming them near that imagined candle. What if peace wasn't something the world handed out? What if it was more like a shelter someone built quietly inside themselves, not made of stone or walls, but of awareness and a certain kind of trust? The thought felt unfamiliar, yet oddly comforting. After all, if peace depended entirely on the outside world, then anyone's mood could steal it. A stranger's impatience, a colleague's criticism, even a careless remark from someone who meant no harm. But what if safety was not a location at all? What if it was a state a person could return to, again and again, like stepping into a warm room after standing in the cold? The candle inside him seemed to steady slightly at the idea, not brighter yet, but less frantic, as though it sensed the possibility of shelter. Elias leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes for a moment. He took one slow breath, then another, without any grand intention behind it, just breathing, the way one does when the body asks for quiet. And somewhere between those two breaths, he began to sense something subtle. Perhaps refuge was not something he had to find after all. Perhaps it was something he had simply never been shown how to return to. Elias had not always noticed the candle inside him. For many years, he simply lived the way most people do, moving quickly from one demand to the next. Work, conversations, expectations, small disappointments that gathered quietly like dust. At first, it all seemed manageable, but slowly, the winds around his life began to grow stronger. It often started with small things, a sharp comment during a meeting, a message left unanswered longer than expected, a glance from someone that felt colder than it probably was. Little moments, really, but each one stirred the air around that fragile flame inside him. When that happened, Elias did what many tired hearts do. He reached for distractions. Another task, another screen, another promise to himself that he'd deal with things later. For a while, those distractions worked like temporary umbrellas in a light drizzle. But when the real storms arrived, they folded quickly. Some evenings he would sit alone in his apartment, staring at the faint glow of the city outside the window. That's when the wind felt loudest. Memories replayed themselves without invitation. Words people had spoken days ago returned with surprising sharpness, and the little candle within him flickered as if it were standing in an open field. He began to wonder if something inside him was broken. After all, other people seemed to move through life without being shaken so easily. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. They laughed, kept going, shrugged things off. Meanwhile, Elias felt every gust. One afternoon, after a particularly heavy day, he walked through the same park again. His shoulders were tight, his thoughts racing like restless birds. Even the soft rustling of leaves sounded like whispers of unfinished worries. He sat on the same bench beneath the old tree, and for a moment he simply held his head in his hands. "Why can't I find a place to rest?" he murmured quietly, not loudly enough for anyone to hear, just enough to release the weight pressing against his chest. The candle flickered again, thin and tired. It had been exposed to too many winds for too long, and Elias honestly believed there was nowhere left to hide it. Yet someone sitting nearby had been watching the same breeze move through the trees, someone who seemed strangely untouched by the restless air of the world. Their posture was calm, their breathing steady, their presence almost anchored, and though Elias didn't know it yet, this quiet stranger had once guarded a very similar candle. Elias finally lifted his head and noticed the old lantern resting on the ground beside the quiet stranger. It was simple, made of worn metal and clear glass, the kind travelers once carried through long nights. Inside it, a small flame burned steadily. The wind moved through the park, brushing the leaves and stirring Elias's coat. Yet the flame inside the lantern barely trembled. He watched it for a moment, almost without meaning to. The breeze that had been bothering him all morning passed right through the open park path. His imaginary candle would have shaken wildly in such wind, but the lantern's flame stayed calm behind its glass walls, protected, quiet, almost patient. The stranger seemed to notice Elias looking. They smiled softly, the way someone does when they recognize a familiar thought. "Strange thing about flames," the stranger said gently, adjusting the lantern beside them. "In the open air, they struggle, but give them even a little shelter, and they remember how to burn steadily." Elias let out a small breath, half thoughtful, half tired. "That must be nice," he said with a faint chuckle. "Mine feels like it's standing in a storm most days." He didn't know why he said it aloud. Perhaps some truths simply grow tired of staying silent. The stranger nodded as though they understood perfectly. "Many people walk around with uncovered flames," they said calmly. "They spend their lives trying to control the wind. They rush, argue, defend themselves, chase distractions. But the wind has never been very interested in listening." Elias looked again at the lantern. The glass was not thick, not complicated, just a small frame surrounding the flame. Yet it made all the difference. Suddenly the idea of shelter felt less abstract. He imagined his own candle placed inside something like that. A quiet space where careless words couldn't blow it sideways, where disappointment might pass by like weather outside a window, where the flame could simply exist without fighting the wind. The thought felt surprisingly possible. The stranger lifted the lantern slightly and placed it on the bench between them. For a moment, the warm light reflected softly in Elias's eyes. "It isn't the wind that decides the strength of the flame," the stranger said quietly. "It's whether the flame has learned how to live within shelter." And Elias suddenly felt there was more to that lantern than he first realized. Elias kept looking at the lantern as if it had quietly revealed a secret. The flame inside moved gently, but it never panicked. Another breeze passed through the park, strong enough to rattle the branches above them. Still, the flame held its place. For the first time that day, Elias felt curious instead of tired. "Does it ever go out?" he asked, nodding toward the lantern. The stranger tilted their head slightly as if considering the question carefully. "Sometimes," they admitted with a soft smile, "but not because of the wind. Usually because the person carrying it forgets it's there." Elias let out a quiet laugh at that. "Sounds familiar," he said. "I've been trying to outrun the wind for years." He rubbed the back of his neck, almost embarrassed by the confession. "And it always seems faster than me." The stranger's expression remained calm, almost warm. "You see," they said gently, tapping the side of the lantern, "most people believe peace lives somewhere outside themselves. So they chase quieter places, kinder people, easier days. But winds travel everywhere." They paused for a moment, watching the flame. "What they rarely consider," the stranger continued, "is that the real refuge was never meant to be outside. It was meant to be built inside, like this small shelter around the flame." Elias leaned forward slightly. "Inside?" he repeated, uncertain. He had heard advice before, lots of it, but most of it sounded complicated. Plans, rules, long explanations about fixing life. This felt different somehow. The stranger seemed to sense his hesitation. They lifted the lantern and placed it gently into Elias's hands. "Feel the warmth," they said softly. "It's small, but steady. That steadiness doesn't come from stopping the wind." Elias held the lantern carefully. The glass was warm, the flame quiet and alive. For a brief moment, the noise inside his mind softened. Not completely gone, just less demanding. And the stranger spoke again, almost like someone opening a door. "The refuge you're searching for," they said, "begins the moment you stop running outward and learn how to return inward instead." Elias looked at the lantern, the tiny flame glowing steadily, and something inside him leaned closer to that idea. Elias held the lantern carefully, almost as if it were a living thing. The warmth against his palms felt steady, calm, patient. He watched the small flame sway gently behind the glass. Outside, the wind still moved through the trees. Yet inside the lantern, the flame seemed to live in a different world. "How do you build something like this inside yourself?" Elias asked quietly. The stranger didn't answer right away. Instead, they took a slow breath, the kind that barely moves the shoulders. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Elias somehow noticed it. "Refuge begins with very small things," the stranger finally said. things people often ignore because they seem too simple. They gestured lightly toward Elias's chest. Your breath, for instance. It's the doorway most people walk past every day. Elias frowned slightly, curious but skeptical. My breath? The stranger nodded gently. When the wind grows strong around your flame, pause for a moment. Then take one slow breath, like this. Elias tried it, half expecting nothing to happen. He inhaled slowly through his nose, the air cool and quiet. Then he let it leave just as gently. For a second, the noise in his thoughts softened, like waves pulling back from the shore. Again, the stranger said softly, one breath to notice the storm, one breath to return to your body, one breath to remember the flame. That's how shelter begins. Elias repeated the slow breath, this time more deliberately. The lantern's flame reflected softly in the glass between them. The wind outside hadn't changed at all, but something inside him had shifted slightly, just enough to feel it. You see, the stranger continued, the refuge isn't a place you escape to. It's a quiet space you enter while everything else keeps moving. Breath, presence, awareness. These are the walls of the lantern, and they are always available. Elias looked down at the flame again, thoughtful. If what the stranger said was true, then the shelter he needed was never far away. It had simply been hidden behind the noise of his own rushing thoughts. A doorway always there, waiting to be used. And for the first time, he wondered what might happen if he practiced stepping through it. Over the next few days, Elias began to carry the memory of that lantern with him. Not the object itself, of course, but the feeling of it resting in his hands. Warm, steady, quietly protected. Whenever the wind of the world stirred again, the image returned to him. A small flame inside a simple shelter. The first real test came sooner than he expected. At work, someone criticized a mistake he had made earlier in the week. The words weren't cruel, but they were sharp enough to sting. Normally, Elias would have defended himself quickly, or carried the comment with him for the rest of the day. Instead, he paused. It wasn't a dramatic pause. No one in the room even noticed it. But inside, Elias remembered the lantern. He took one slow breath, then another, just like the stranger had shown him. For a moment, the wind rushed loudly around his thoughts. Embarrassment, irritation, the urge to react immediately. All the familiar gusts returned. Yet the simple act of breathing created a tiny space around the flame, a thin glass wall beginning to form. All right, he said calmly after a moment. You're right. I missed that detail. The conversation moved on faster than he expected. No storm, no lingering tension. Just another moment passing through the day. Later that evening, Elias walked through the same park again. The wind was there, of course, it always was. But this time, he didn't feel like a candle standing in the open field. Instead, he imagined the lantern gently surrounding the flame. Not perfect, but present. He practiced small things. A single slow breath when frustration appeared. A quiet pause when someone's tone felt colder than expected. Sometimes he even wrote one simple sentence in a notebook before bed. Today I remembered the lantern. Little by little, the world felt less like a storm he had to survive. The wind still came, just as often as before, but the flame inside him had begun to learn something new, how to burn steadily, even while the wind continued to move through the trees. And though Elias didn't realize it yet, the real test of his new refuge was still waiting. Not in the quiet park, but somewhere out in the world where storms rarely announce themselves. A few mornings later, Elias found himself in a crowded cafe before work. The place buzzed with quiet impatience, spoons clinking, chairs sliding, voices layered on top of each other. He stood in line waiting for his coffee when someone behind him sighed loudly. Then came the comment, "You're blocking the line, you know." In the past, that small sentence would have sparked a quick reaction, a defensive reply, maybe a sharp tone in return, the kind of moment that lingers awkwardly long after it ends. And for a second, Elias felt the familiar gust of wind rise, that old urge to protect the flame by fighting the storm. But then something gentle appeared in his awareness. The lantern. Not the real one, of course, just the quiet memory of it. He imagined the small flame behind the glass, steady despite the breeze. Without rushing, he took one slow breath, then another. The noise of the cafe softened slightly. Not outside. People still talked, cups still clinked. But inside, a small stillness formed around the flame, like stepping into a calm room while the wind continued outside. The difference was subtle, yet unmistakable. Elias turned around and smiled politely. "Oh, sorry about that." he said, stepping forward. No irritation in his voice, no hidden edge, just a simple response carried by a steady flame. The stranger blinked, surprised by the calm reply. Thanks, they muttered, their own tension dissolving almost instantly. And just like that, the moment passed. No storm, no lingering wait, just another breath in the rhythm of the morning. Elias walked out with his coffee a few minutes later. The wind brushed lightly against his coat as he crossed the street, but something inside him had changed in a quiet, almost invisible way. The flame felt less fragile now, more at home. He realized then that Refuge wasn't reserved for silent parks or peaceful afternoons. It could appear in crowded cafes, difficult conversations, unexpected criticism. Anywhere, really. All it required was a moment of return, a breath, and the remembering of the lantern. And as Elias continued walking, he wondered something gently hopeful. If such a small pause could change a moment like that, what other storms might soften once a person truly learns how to step into their inner refuge? Later that afternoon, Elias returned once more to the quiet park path. The same bench waited beneath the old tree, leaves moving softly in the breeze. He sat down slowly, the way one does when there's no longer a rush to escape the moment. The wind brushed through the branches again, but this time he watched it with a quiet kind of curiosity. He closed his eyes for a moment and imagined the lantern again. Not the metal frame, not the glass exactly, just the feeling of it. A small shelter surrounding a warm, steady flame. It wasn't dramatic or mystical, just calm and gently protective. Elias took a slow breath through his nose. The air filled his chest like cool morning light entering a quiet room. Then he let the breath leave slowly, as if he were clearing space around the flame. Nothing complicated, nothing forced, just breathing, the way the stranger had shown him. He imagined the lantern resting in the center of his chest. The wind outside continued moving through the park, rustling leaves and brushing the grass. But inside the lantern, the flame stayed steady, not fighting the wind, simply protected from it. Another breath came naturally. With it, he noticed something interesting. The thoughts that had been swirling earlier, tiny worries, unfinished conversations, they hadn't disappeared. They had simply moved farther away from the flame. Elias smiled slightly, eyes still closed. Perhaps this was what the stranger meant about refuge always being available. Not something you travel toward, just something you remember to enter, one quiet breath at a time. He imagined someone else sitting on this bench someday, someone whose candle had been shaking in the wind all morning, and he thought how simple the doorway really was. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture the lantern. Take one slow breath, then another. Let the flame settle behind its glass, and when the world grows loud again, simply return. Elias opened his eyes and watched the branches sway above him. The wind had not disappeared, but the flame within felt steady in a way it never had before. And somewhere in that quiet moment, a deeper understanding began to form, one that would soon change how he saw every storm. The sun had begun its slow descent when Elias rose from the bench. Golden light filtered through the branches, painting soft patterns across the path. The wind still wandered through the park the way it always had, yet the small flame within him felt quietly protected, not because the wind had disappeared, but because something within had changed. He walked slowly, noticing things he usually overlooked, the gentle rhythm of his steps, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Even the way the air moved against his face felt different now, less like a threat, more like weather passing by. For years, Elias had believed strength meant controlling the world around him, fixing every situation, answering every criticism, defending every fragile part of himself. But the lantern had revealed a quieter truth. The strongest shelter was never built outside. It was carried within. The wind would always return, in the form of harsh words, unexpected disappointments, lonely evenings, uncertain mornings. Life had never promised calm skies, but a flame protected within its lantern could endure storms, not by resisting the wind, but by resting inside its refuge. Elias paused for a moment near the edge of the park. He placed a hand lightly over the center of his chest. There it was again, the gentle warmth of the flame. Not dramatic, not blazing, just steady. He took one slow breath, the same way he had practiced. And in that quiet breath, he understood something many people spend years chasing. Peace was never hiding somewhere far away. It had always been waiting behind the door of awareness. A person who learns to return to that quiet place carries a sanctuary everywhere, through crowded streets and silent rooms, through praise, criticism, success, and disappointment alike. The wind may move loudly around them, but the flame continues to burn. Elias smiled softly and continued walking as evening settled over the park. The lantern was no longer in his hands. It didn't need to be. Its quiet lesson now lived somewhere deeper, a shelter no storm could reach. And perhaps, somewhere nearby, another traveler walked through the wind today, unaware that within them too there waited a small flame ready to be carried home.